Ngā mana nui o te ao, ngā tapu nui o te pō, tēnā rā koutou katoa. Ngā mihi nui ki a tātou I hui hui mai te pōnei, nau mai, hara mai ki tēnei wāhanga. He uri tēnei o ngā puhi nui tonu ko Ngāti Kahuki Whangaroa te hapu, ko Bianca Ranson tōku ingoa. Greetings and welcome everybody to this webinar this evening, Matike Mai Beyond Elections. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll open our evening with karakia. Amohia e hika tōkete, ki te tuahu o te wānanga, ki reira, horomia tōkai, kia heke, heke rawa, tau atu, ki te kōpū nui, ki te ngākau roa, kia tiaho ki roto, kia marama ki waho, ki tihei te mauri ora, ki te whaiao ki te ao marama, tihei mauri ora. Swallow your teachings to the pit of your stomach. Do not hold them in your head alone, lest they become caught in debate between your mind and your tongue. Instead, absorb them carefully into your being, so the lessons may come forth as actions through your hands. That is a karakia from Chaz Doherty, e mihi ana. This webinar this evening is being hosted by a rōpū called Kaiawhina, who are based in Tāmaki, Makaurau. Formed out of the Palestine movement, we are a rōpū who provide martial and medic services for protests and support community kai on Key Road weekly. A kaupapa that shares warm, nutritious meals for up to 200 rough sleepers in street whānau. While this week marks the 142nd consecutive weeks of protest for Palestine and the ongoing genocide, Kaiawhina are also intersectional, and we support takatapui, trans and rainbow communities, the Māori protest movement, migrant rights and workers' unions. Our values are kia manaki, practice care and respect, kia tika, to be principled, kaupapa driven and non-violent, kia pono, to speak the truth and have integrity, kia manawa nui, to be steadfast, patient and disciplined, and kia whakakotahi, to create strength and unity. And we invite you all to stand with us in these values this evening as we've been mindful, respectful, and stay on kaupapa. There is a Q&A function for you to put forward questions to our panelists at the end of each session. And we would like to say a big thank you to Hana from Action Station, who was in the background moderating this event for us this evening. This webinar came about from Matariki and I connecting at the Together for the Vote hui in Pōneke about maybe a month or two ago now. And the incredible presentation that you did, Matariki, to everyone at that hui. We're so very thankful, and it brought about us wanting to raise awareness for our rōpū. And then subsequently, we decided to extend the invitation to anybody who was interested in coming and learning about this kaupapa. So it's a real honor to have everyone with us this evening, and to our panelists. And I'll now hand it over to you. E te tuahine Matariki. Kia ora.
Kia ora, tēnā koe Bianca, and tēnā tātou e te hui, tēnei pō. Ko Matariki tōku ingoa, he uri tēnei no nai tūhoi nā tiawa he Pākehā hoki a hau. Kei tāne atu a hau e noho ana, e mihi ana ki a koutou. So kia ora whānau, my name's Matariki, from the nations of Tūhoi and Ngātiawa and Pākehā. And yeah, coming in from the Eastern Bay of Plenty tonight. So yeah, really wonderful. I love spreading the good word of Matike Mai, and it's a real pleasure to be here with this awesome panel as well. Before I share my slides, and we'll go on a picture journey of this Matike Mai with some art. That's what we need more of, art, an expression of our movement, you know. I just want to sort of ground us. Matike Mai Aotearoa. Yes, it's a report, but it's an articulation of the whakapapa of our Māori movement for tino rangatiratanga since mai rano, right? And so one of the things we're going to talk about is we have these two worlds in Aotearoa. We have Te Ao Māori, and we have this Westminster system that's come from the UK, from England, and imposed itself on our land and on our people and on our systems. So at the moment, Te Ao Māori still here, still beautiful, but this other system's come and sits on top, right? Sits on top of us. And so even when you think about a Māori health authority, or even when you think about treaty settlements, this shape, the authority, the imposition of political power still sits on top of our Māori world. So Matike Mai is about coming out from under that system completely. So that's what we're talking about, whānau, for those of you new to this, and we'll dive in. Let me get my things on. Tēnei mea. Tēnei. Ka pai. Choi. Oh, continue. Ka pai. All right, whānau, let's get going. All right, so Matike Mai Aotearoa, you'll also hear it as constitutional transformation. And I have counted that is 9 syllables, and it's a real mouthful, and it makes people's eyes water when you say constitutional transformation 10 times fast, right? So another way to think about it is as the ultimate systems change. We're always talking about, let's change the system, change the system. Well, changing it at a constitutional level is the ultimate systems change in Aotearoa. Now, what do we mean by the system? Well, if you picture the system as a tree that's growing, our laws and policies can be like the branches and the leaves at the top of the tree, right? And so we start fighting. We want to change that law. One government comes in, prunes off one law, grafts on its own law, and we're like, yay, we changed the system. Next government comes in, prunes off that law, grafts on their law. Oh, no, and it just keeps going like that. So even when you achieve something under the system, well, 3 years later could be gone skis. And so we look to the root of the tree. And the root of the tree, of the system, is the Constitution. It informs how that tree grows and what laws and policies can grow from it. So what is a constitution? Well, this is Papa Moana Jackson whānau, and he's the author of Matike Mai, articulating, yes, the whakapapa of the movement, but also a lot of kōrero from the grassroots. And he says a constitution is simply the set of values that we agree to live by, right? So your values, the code, what do you stand for? What do you believe in? What's your constitution as a person, your values that guide your decisions? Well, constitution as a nation is the set of values that should then guide the decisions of the system, of the decision-making that affects all of us, right? Cool. So to begin, we have to go back. We have to understand that there are at least 2 worlds here, and there are 2 legal systems in Aotearoa. So on your screen on the left, that's Te Ao Māori. And we have a legal system in Te Ao Māori where our concept of power is mana, and the site of power, where that power resides, is at the hapu level, okay? And all of that political authority, all those decision-making authority comes from the whenua. The whenua, the land, is our source of authority. And that's why we have concepts like mana whenua. So if you were to travel here and come visit me in Tūhoi, then by coming here into this whenua, into this land, you accept the jurisdiction of Tūhoi. But if I go hide and I go and visit my sister Te Kotuku over in Tūrana, well, I'll accept the jurisdiction of the mana whenua where I go there. If I go to Tainui, same thing, right? So our legal system was decentralized in that way, where the landscape, just as the landscape was diverse, the people in the tikanga were diverse, though there might be underlying shared values, okay? So that's our tikanga in a nutshell, whānau. We could spend all night talking about that. That's our tikanga on that side. Then on the right-hand side, you have this Westminster system. Now, Westminster is a place in the UK, right? So this system doesn't come from Aotearoa. It grew up in the other side of the world, and it was imported and imposed upon the land here. And it's a really completely different system at the philosophical level. So in the top, you can see it's a triangle, eh? So the concept of power that they have in Westminster is this idea of sovereignty. It's a hierarchical power. And it comes from this idea of the divine right of kings, that a man in the sky chose the king and vested in him the power to rule over all the people, all the land, and all the fish in the sea. And that hierarchy, you think about the land is now just a property, a resource that can be cut up into title and sold off to the highest bidder. There's nothing necessarily special about her. She could just be sold like any other household item. And so it's an opposite system to tikanga. It's a very hierarchical system. And that power, that divine right of kings, resides in the monarch, the king. But over time, that power of sovereignty got transferred into parliament. And that's what we have here in Aotearoa, is a centralized system in Wellington that tries to govern over all of the people, all of the land, and the fish in the sea. Yeah. Now, in the middle of these two worlds, you can see the meeting ground. These two documents, He Whakaputanga o Te Rangatiratanga, 1835, our Declaration of Independence, and then the younger sister, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, 1840. Those documents describe how these two worlds were supposed to relate to each other, or are to relate to each other. That's the meeting ground. So the first one, and we could also spend ages talking about these documents, but we'll just keep it short here. So He Whakaputanga o Te Rangatiratanga just declares the obvious. So at that time, the rangatira in the north, they'd been watching in wānanga for decades, watching these newcomers come, be in trade, and decided, okay, we're going to do something that we already know we have rangatiratanga here because we've had it since time immemorial. But what we're going to do is we're going to write it down on a piece of paper in your style so you also know it. So we declare our independence. Ka pai, choice, that was acknowledged by the Colonial Office, which is like Colonial HQ back in the day, Global Colonial HQ, and by King William over in England, who we had rangatira in the north, had relationships with him. That's Queen Victoria's dad. And so that was acknowledged. So that acknowledges the rangatiratanga of that te ao Māori. And then 5 years later, Te Tiriti o Waitangi is born. And the same group came together and said, actually, we want to enter into a treaty with these guys. We're going to say, you're invited to live here, and you can even govern yourselves, just like all of our hapu govern themselves. You can be like that. You can have a kāwana, a governor, and you can govern yourselves subject to honouring the world that already exists here and our tino rangatiratanga. So you can call this place home. So Te Tiriti is really an invitation that creates belonging for those that arrive here, subject to honouring tino rangatiratanga. It's a pretty amazing invitation. Cool, whānau. So that's those two. Moving on. All right. And so if you hear of this sort of the Treaty of Waitangi, well, whānau, just know that's a completely different document, and Māori never ceded sovereignty. And actually, there's no word for cede in Te Reo Māori. And the idea that we would give away mana, or that one of our rangatira could give away the mana of their people and all the people to come, was legally impossible in our world, culturally incomprehensible, beyond the imagination that that's even possible, and constitutionally untenable. Under our tikanga, it just simply wasn't possible. So if you hear any rumours out there about Māori ceding sovereignty, it's a myth take. It's a myth. Ka pai. So whānau, when we talk about constitutional transformation as the ultimate systems change, we actually need to understand a little bit more about the system that's currently sitting on top of us now. And we don't get taught this stuff at school. So if this is new to you, I'm not surprised. This is probably intentionally not taught. So we have a constitution in Aotearoa. I know when you think constitution, usually most people think about the US because it's all throughout their movies. We have one, but it's an unwritten constitution. And that means it's scattered throughout a bunch of different documents. And there's only 3 countries in the world that have an unwritten constitution like that. There's us, there's the UK where we got it from, and then there's Israel, which I'll be honest, not the best company to be amongst, okay? Now, just a trigger warning, whānau, because this is our system. This is how the shape of our system today. At the top dog of our constitution in Aotearoa is King Charlie. There he is with his regalia. He is the head of our state, even though he lives over in England. And he's been here a few times, maybe, I don't know. He's the top dog of our constitution. Now, he's represented in Aotearoa by the Governor General. That's Dame Cindy Kiro. And the Governor General, think Governor Grey, Governor General, that's the role, right? Right there. So she's his representative here in Aotearoa. Now, some people might say, yeah, sure. Still, we got the monarchy, but that's just symbolic. It doesn't mean anything. But actually, it is powerful. It's really powerful. If any law is to be passed in Aotearoa, for it to be law, it needs the Governor General's signature on behalf of the King. If she doesn't sign it, the law doesn't pass. And then should, a government lose confidence in the House, it's the Governor General's role to step in. She's the kind of one that steps in and dissolves Parliament and calls a new election. And they're really important roles. That's sort of the backup plan within the Constitution of where power resides, okay? So it's important to know that. And then on the daily, when we think about our government, there are 3 branches of government, okay? The first one is Parliament, also known as the legislature or the legislative branch or the House of Representatives. And that's where all the MPs sit. So, this idea of democracy is that we vote for an MP and then they go and be our representative and sit in this Parliament. So this includes all of them. And this Parliament, whenever they make a law, that becomes the top law. There's no kind of upper level in our constitution. In some countries, there's like higher constitutional laws or supreme laws. These ones we just have, as soon as Parliament makes a law, it's the top law. So they make law and they also have oversight over the government. So the next branch, oh, sorry, I should have done a trigger warning. This next branch is the executive branch, okay? The executive branch of power, they include the Prime Minister and his deputy ministers featured, his cabinet, and then they also have power over the public service and foreign relations, so how we're currently relating internationally, the free trade agreements we're signing, how we're aligning with the US, whether we say we support Israel or not, all those things, those decisions reside within the executive branch. They get to make those decisions. And then really importantly, this executive branch also manages the police and the military. And that is where the power of government becomes physical and violent. And so it's not just theoretical, this power, They do have the ability to arrest and detain. Our prisons are full, thousands of people. And being from Tūhoe, it was only yesterday that we got raided by, the Secret Service. So that power is very real, This branch also controls the budget. So the billions of dollars that we raise as taxpayers, they get to decide how to spend that. And so, whānau, just pausing for a second to say, please enroll to vote. Because even though no government's ever going to give back our tino rangatiratanga, whoever sits in this role, we can either spend all our time fighting them, or if they have a bit better inkling of te tiriti, maybe we can get on with building our tino rangatiratanga and not have to spend so much time fighting them. So voting for a better government, executive branch, means that we win at the small game, at this little game, so that we can charge for the bigger game of actually building our rangatiratanga. So just a little plug there, whānau. Now, the problem with our constitution, or one of them, is that this executive branch dominates that parliament branch. because they run over 50% of that parliamentary branch. So while those branches of power are supposed to be separate, there's a massive overlap. And that's why you see these dudes pumping through law like there's no tomorrow. Why pay equity was a decision at cabinet, 48 hours later, billions of dollars were made into law, taken off wahine claiming, for their pay inequity and justice. Right. And when Papa Mike Smith is suing Zed and Fonterra for climate change abuses towards Papatūānuku, and these executive ministers jump in and go, oh, you can't do that anymore. That's the same. They exercise this power. Okay, the third branch of government is the judiciary. So that's the court system, whānau, and they are a bit more independent. Yes. So Parliament's supposed to have supremacy, sovereignty. They have the power of the king. In theory, the executive branch is supposed to be accountable to Parliament. That's why they have question time. But in practice, these guys have what they call unbridled power. They just get to roll. And then the judiciary in other countries, when the decision at Parliament or a law is being made and it's unconstitutional, in the sense that it breaches the values of our constitution, what we hold dear, the courts in other countries can often step in and say, no, that's unconstitutional. We're sending you back to the drawing board. But in Aotearoa, we don't have that power. Those courts don't have that. And that's why there's such weakness in our constitution. Even if you didn't care about te tiriti, our constitution is weak. And that's why you can see this government just rolling with their agenda. And again, why it's so important to vote. Now, whānau, just pausing for a second, look at this picture. Kei hea te tiriti. Where's te tiriti? She's meant to be the founding document that organizes the relationship between these two worlds. Kei hea? Wow. Ki waho. Ki waho. Some people might say, oh, well, it's in the laws, or maybe in the courts they uphold te tiriti, but no, it's still this shape, whānau? It's still this shape. Te tiriti said, we want this. This is what the picture was, but that is the shape that we're in. All right. That was a whirlwind. Cool. Enter Matike Mai, whānau. So that's the system. That's the shape that we're in. Now, what was Matike Mai? Matike Mai, yes, was a wonderful report that came out in 2016. It's an expression of over 300 hui with it's 5,000 Māori people. And Papa Moana Jackson attended, almost all of those hui, writing down, listening to the people, writing down their whakaaro. Now, his question that he took out to the motu, to all of these whānau Māori, was, what would an inclusive constitution for Aotearoa look like? And the word inclusive is really important here, because the pātai was out to the Māori world, asking the Māori world, what do we think about a constitution for everyone, inclusive of everyone who now calls our islands home, right? And what would an inclusive constitution for Aotearoa look like based on the whakapapa? He whakaputanga, te tiriti, our kawa and tikanga, and also our standing and our rights at international law, because we're global citizens as well. And so if a constitution is a set of values that we agree to live by, then what Papa Moana wrote about in Matike Mai was he articulated 7 of those values, right? These are the values, whānau. And so this is our last slide, and I'm going to go through these values and describe them. And then we're going to turn to our awesome panelists, and we're going to ask, okay, what next? How do we enliven these? All right. So the first value you'll notice is the one in Te Reo Māori, and it's the value of tikanga. So you can think about tikanga, yes, as our legal system, and it's like being in right relationship with each other and with the whenua. Tika, what's the correct way to do these things? All right, so a constitution should protect and uplift and rely on tikanga. The second value there is the value of community. Now, that is about every community in Aotearoa should have their ability to have fair representation in decision making. It's like that phrase, nothing about us without us. So if there's a law to be passed about the Māori community or different hapu, or tangata Pasifika, tangata Moana, or about Takatapui community or Whaikaha community, all these different types of communities. Matike Mai is saying that those communities should have the ability that a constitution should protect their voice for any decisions about them, right? The third one is this value of belonging. And there's two sides to this. So there's a special type of belonging of tangata whenua, right? So tangata whenua have a particular type of belonging to Aotearoa. Just like we have native birds, we have native people, right? Tangata whenua are the expression of the land here. And then there's this reality that every human needs a sense of belonging in order to be well. And so for our society to live in harmony, we need to protect in our laws anything that can protect a sense of belonging for all people and to honor this idea of mana whenua, right? It's like manaakitanga, All right. The fourth value is really obvious, and it's already kind of in tikanga anyway, but it's this idea of the value of place, that we have a responsibility as humans, as the youngest of Papa Tuanuku's children, we have a responsibility to care for Papa. And so any law that is passed should have instilled within it an interest in caring for the land. So our constitution would protect the whenua. Then these last three are slightly more technical, I would say, but the value of balance is this idea that, balance between tino rangatiratanga and kāwanatanga. At the moment, we know that kāwanatanga, the government, is swollen and bloated and way too big and needs to be drawn down to size, and that tino rangatiratanga to rise up and to be alongside, in balance. There's different spheres of authority. Then we have this idea of conciliation, okay? Not sure if any of you have been to question time in Parliament and seen how they bicker between themselves, like random angry school kids, or even worse, But that type of democracy that we see in our Parliament today, that's adversarial and majoritarian. It's sort of bully boy democracy where one side's literally called the opposition. If you were designing a way to make decisions, would you bake in opposition to any decision that one other side says? Cool. So the idea of conciliation is that a democracy should be conciliatory and consensual. We can still disagree, but let us value our relationships and try and get to a good answer. Let's be conciliatory. And that's same within our court system. If anyone's gone through the family court, it's a rugged system. Imagine a system that was based on this value of conciliation, And then the final value there is structure. It's about structure. So for us to be able to uphold these values, and recognizing that soon there'll be 6 million of us in these islands. That's the most that our home, Aotearoa, has ever hosted. It's the most humans we've ever hosted in these islands. And so we need a structure that's going to uphold these values, right? So if you look at those values and you think, okay, if that's the root of the system, what kinds of laws can extend from that? Would it be legal under this system for homelessness to be through the roof, for child poverty to be through the roof? Would that be legal under this system? Would it be legal for more than 60% of our awa to be poisoned beyond the point of being able to swim in them? Would it be legal for more than 70% of our prisons to be wahine Māori and more than 50% to be tāne Māori of our prisons? So this is where the rubber hits the road, where values become laws. Okay? All right, whānau. So that is the vision of Matike Mai. It's based on a whole lot of kōrero coming from the grassroots of a Māori perspective. And the next sort of step is to take this kōrero out to all across Aotearoa, to all different communities, and to kōrero about these values. Not to jump too far ahead and start trying to put together a structure, but to actually connect to each other on the values level, because constitutional transformation will be social and cultural before it is political and legal. We're not looking for the kāwana to give us this. We need to build this in ourselves and in our organizations within our whānau in order to see it. We create it at the small scale so that we can see it at the large scale, right? Awesome. Okay, let's now turn to our panel. And our kōrero is really going to be about how do we make this happen? What's next? Cool. So I'll stop share and welcome back our panel. Kia ora whānau. I can see a few questions. And remember, there's a Q&A function if you're out there in the world sending us questions. Goodbye. That's fabulous. Okay, well, thank you. Welcome to the stage. Welcome back, Bianca Ranson, sorry. Dylan Asafo, tēnā koe, Mikey Brenndorfer, and te Kotuku Irwin-Stanton. Welcome, welcome. My first partai is actually just going to be ko wai koe, no hea koe, and what's your mahi? And I'll pass to you first, Kotuku, because you're on my left, and if you could pass it next. Kia ora whānau.
Kia ora tātou, o tira tēnā koe Matariki, koroa ko Bianca. Tēnā koe Bianca, nau I tūwhera I tō tātou wānanga I tēnei pōno reira. Tēnā koe, o tira tēnā tātou katoa ko Kotuku rere ngātahi Irwin-Stanton ahau. He uri tēnei no ngā kāhui maunga o Hikurangi, mai pōtikirua ki te toka taiao. I te puake au I raro I te maru o te poho rauri marae Ngāti Onione ki roto I a tūranganui ākiwa. And tēnā tātou. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Te Kotuku. I hail from Te Tairawhiti, Ngāti Porou, Tātanga Mahaki, Te Whakatohea, and Ngāti Onione, where my whānau currently reside. But I currently reside part-time in the beautiful lands of Rangitane Manawatu, where I work at Massey, very lucky to work at Massey, and also a part of our Te Aotearoa Educators Network squad, where there's a network of us Tiriti educators. So that's my mahi as I do Tiriti stuff. Also very interested in what they call critical theories, which is very, very connected deeply to stuff like Matike Mai. So yeah, just really want to mahi to all of those who have paved the way for Matike Mai as well, such as Dr Moana, Margaret Mutu, those still paving the way. Irwin Jones, who I know is watching at the moment, Ani Makaere, Matariki, who does wonderful work, of course, our mate, Veronica Tawhai, and lots of, and also just mihi to all the other panelists, to Bianca and Matariki for all the behind the scenes organising. Amazing, very honoured to be here, sis, and very honoured to be partaking in this such important, critical conversation, and also just such the amazing presentation that you just gave, Matariki, I just have to say. Also, from all of those different places, but as well as a part of the fan club for Matariki. So yeah, anyway, I'll pass on to Dylan. Kia ora, Dylan. Oh, you're on mute, brother.
Oh, sorry. I just realized I was on mute. So I started.
It's fine.
Kia ora tātou, no hāmoa o ko tūpuna, kei tāmaki makaurau ahau e noho ana ko Dylan Asafo tuku ingoa. Taulofa lava, malo le soifua maua, malilangi mama. Hi everyone, my name is Dylan. I'm Samoan. I'm from the villages of Salangi, Sātalo, Siumu, Mota'a, Nilfisa. I was born in Nam, otherwise known as Melbourne, on Kulin land and raised mostly in Tāmaki Makaurau, Aotearoa. I currently work as a researcher and a lecturer at the University of Auckland. And what I'm passionate about is exploring critical approaches to constitutional law and international law and theories and acts of resistance and liberation in Oceania and beyond. So yeah, it's such a privilege to be here and looking forward to getting stuck into the kōrero. I'll pass it on to Mikey.
Kia ora koutou. Yeah, my name is Mikey Brenndorfer. I'm originally from Canada. I grew up on Treaty 3 land of the Wabagoon Lake Ojibwe Nation, and then arrived in Aotearoa back in 1996, not far from where Matariki's based. I went to Whakatani High School back in the day. And I, during the day for Mahi, I'm a nurse practitioner working for a Ho'ora Māori provider, mostly in youth health, but also in a mainstream medical center as well. Bianca asked me to be part of this today, so I'm super humbled to be part of this panel with all of you awesome people. I'm connected with Kai Awhina, and is one of the co-founders of the Street Medics Collective, which has worked alongside Kai Awhina for quite a while. Our roots are in the Occupy Aotearoa Square protest back in 2011. I've been around in activism for quite a while. Well, I can. Got Skate Park, who's also from Tani Aotearoa, visiting. So Matariki got to meet Skate Park back when she was a little kid. But I'll pass on to Bianca.
Tēnā tātou. I've kind of already introduced myself. I'm Bianca. I'm from the far north, from a place called Whangaroa. And on my mum's side, I am Pākehā, and I live out on a small motu off Tāmaki called Waiheke. During the day, I am a campaigner, so I'm currently helping with the election campaign for a big environmental NGO called Forest and Bird. You might have seen our maps that we put up about the Conservation Amendment Bill and the land that was at risk of being privatised and up for economic development. And I'm also on the Waiheke Local Board, so I'm in my second term in local government, and I'm part of Kai Awhina, so I'm also one of the co-founders alongside Mikey and many others. And that is definitely a kaupapa that I care deeply about. We're a community care and self-defense group that looks out for our different movements and rallies and protests and private events. And we have a saying which is, who keeps us safe, we keep us safe. And so that's keeping ourselves safe in lots of ways, including from potential arrest from the police as well. And really value the mahi that Mikey does with the street medics and the other emergency doctors and first responders and nurses that volunteer their time to come out onto the streets and support those kaupapa too. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, whānau. So as you can see, we've got a panel of people who are connected to the movement and active in their communities, doing all sorts of different mahi. And so my first pātai to the panel is about hope. So some will say that the Matike Mai vision is unrealistic. Even if they like this vision that we just shared, there might be a sense of hopelessness that it's just too idealistic. So what do we as the panel think about that? And I might toss it to you first, Mikey, and then you could share or find someone's eyes where they go, I want to go next.
Yeah, one of the big things I think is really important around this question is to acknowledge that hopelessness is a feature of neoliberal capitalist colonialism, that this is how they want us to feel. They want to have built in so many barriers throughout the way we move through the world that it feels like we just can't change anything, that the way it is now is the way it has to be, and we're not going to be able to achieve any change. And that's historically very not true. We know that we have the Ursula Le Guin quote, the power of capitalism might feel inescapable at the moment, but so too did the divine right of kings in the past, and that those kingdoms were toppled. And they were toppled by people who had a vision of constitutional change. And that's historically what, we see in the past. And there's also really good current examples of communities fighting for and achieving constitutional change, like in the Chile protests that happened, what was it, 2019 or so. We have, in Bolivia, the inclusion of indigenous worldviews in the constitutional amendments that happened there. Facts are, we can make change, and they don't want us to know that we can, and they don't want us to have hope, but we can. I am trying to see if anyone's like
You got
their eyebrows.
look at them. Rangi, kia ora, Mikey. Go on, unmute the next person.
Okay, I'll go. Kia ora, Mikey. Yes, the hope question. So to give some context, in my intro, I said I was from Ngāti Unione, that we're a hapu in Gisborne. If you've ever been to Kaitihu or Te Tirangi Maunga or Te Poho Rawiri Marae, it's big marae, you can't miss it. Those are our home territories. And last year we, for a long time actually, a core part of our identity has been in our tikanga, has been in our values, and one of our values has been deeply embedded within us is manaakitanga. And prior to last year, we had always been the people that were at the marae, busy looking after the people, looking after our people in Kaiti, looking after the whenua, the taiao, the waterways around us, and the destruction within those. And the beginning of last year, we decided to do a land occupation on the whenua, and it's a bit of a long story, so if anyone wants to look into it, please do. Feel free to, flick me a message or just Google Ngāti Unione. But that was a 174-day land occupation that we did. And prior to that, we had, as said, we had always been the people that stayed back in the marae and manaaki, but there were different motivating factors, including our mokopuna, including the fact that the only land that we had legally was the land that our marae sits on. And the way in which we had been treated for so long by the entities that were responsible for the taking of our land under the Public Works Act in the early 1900s, resulted in us deciding that enough was enough. And that was, a really big decision. As a very small hapu, we have no money, we have, and so there were lots of different challenges, but that was one of the, it was a huge identity shift for us as Ngāti Unione. And we were very strategic, and we had like night shifts and different whānau, different hapu. So just, really want to mihi to all the different hapu across Te Tairāwhiti and beyond. So in the whānau who, put their hand up to do night shifts and put their hand up to come and do day shifts with us. And we had 2 sites that we're occupying, so not just one. We had a ahi that was going 24/7, and we vowed to have that ahi go until we regained legal title of the land. And the land we were asking for was land that the port, Gisborne Port, and Trust Tairāwhiti weren't using for core business. And so long story short, we did get a few parcels of whenua returned back legally. That was a very long story, but long story short, we did get, return legal title of that land. And in terms of the, is it unrealistic? Is Matike Mai unrealistic? I think even before last year, we would have thought, getting our land back, that's unrealistic. Because we have these 3 main entities, they're huge, this one huge corporate entity, and then we have the council, and then we have, the port that makes millions and millions of dollars of profit off our land that was stolen. So, and there's this small little hapu. So I think the idea of, that being unrealistic was very real, but look at where we are today, and it requires a lot of bravery. It requires courage. And I know Papa Moana used to talk about courage. Bravery is just the deep breath you take before you do something really hard, do something really difficult. And also in terms of the unrealistic question, or, is Matike Mai unrealistic? I do, remember reading something by Papa Moana that said, well, when we, like, even the argument that it's unrealistic is a retreat away from the debate. That's not really an argument. It's just kind of moving away from the debate and moving away from actually the vision and the restoration of tino rangatiratanga and the restoration of justice that is required. And it's not just about Māori communities. It's not just about hapu. It's not just about the injustices that have happened across Aotearoa, not just to Māori communities, but minorities. It's also the injustice that is currently happening to the whenua, and the taiao. So I really believe, we can do it, whānau, and faith. And I know Papa Moana used to talk a lot about faith too, the restoration of faith. That is the huge restoration of tino rangatiratanga, is actually the faith within ourselves that we can do that, and actually the faith that our tipuna would never have, given away their mana to some lady in England they'd never met before, So, so that's me. I'm going to pass on to Dylan.
Kia ora te Kotuku. That was brilliant, and brilliant too, Mikey. I guess just to add, I think it may be helpful for us to think and frame Matike Mai less as an idealistic vision that we just hope will come about, and more as an urgent necessity for our survival. Because the current colonial constitutional arrangements that Matariki went through, they're assuring and accelerating our death and destruction, and the destruction of the earth and lands and oceans. And at this moment, many of us know the climate science and accelerating US imperialism and fascism, they're making it clear that we won't survive many more years or decades with these current constitutional arrangements. We're getting past the warming that's sustainable for most life, and there's already been so much climate destruction in Aotearoa and the wider Pacific. And the colonial constitutional arrangements that we have, they've allowed this to take place. They've authorized that destruction. We know that they've allowed the coalition government to come into power and allowed it to accelerate the destruction of the environment and align with the US and Israel. But it's really important, I think, that we understand that the processes of destruction, they're not going to stop or go away if we happen to have a Labour government or a coalition Labour government come in. And not only because we've seen time and time again their commitments to colonial capitalism, along with the right-wing parties. We've seen what little they do when they come into power. I hope we don't have a short memory from what was ignored and what wasn't pursued and what was conceded to the right-wing powers as well. But also with our constitutional arrangements, we know that if we do have a Labour government come in, for sure, soon enough, we're going to have another national-led government that's going to undo any minimal progress that's made. It's the swinging pendulum of destruction and death, and we're running out of time. So with that, I think the question isn't whether Matike Mai is realistic or unrealistic, but whether we're willing to survive and do what it takes to survive. The stakes, I think, are that high. We have no other choice but to fight for Matike Mai and other constitutional transformation processes if we want to survive. And I think we also have to emphasize the inevitability of constitutional transformation as well. And there's that amazing quote from Moana Jackson, and others have said this as well, that constitutional transformation is inevitable. And I think it's absolutely true. We have to believe and act as though it's inevitable. It's as inevitable as our children's lives and their children's lives and the continued life of our lands and our oceans. So we have to really take seriously the urgency of Matike Mai. And I think reorienting our thinking, or thinking about the way that we talk about Matike Mai to others, because I'm sure many of us are going away to our communities and our circles to talk about Matike Mai, I think could be helpful to maybe move away from the language of possibility or in realism or hope, and towards an emphasis on urgency and survival and inevitability. And that can help strengthen our movement and generate the tactics that we need.
Kia ora. Kei a koe, Bianca. Tēnā koe, Dylan.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you for all of that. Yeah, incredible kōrero, and agree with everything that's been said, and really want to acknowledge what Dylan has just said as well, and that it can seem hard to have any kind of hope on the horizon within this current settler colonial Westminster system, and the realization that all parties that are locked into that system are the enemy of our liberation. And so I think that ultimately, you know, the most incredible sense of hope comes out of the urgency and the knowing that we will bring this into being, and that we're actually already a part of the, you know, of all of us rising up in the realization of Matike Mai now, and that it looks different in many different ways. And yeah, I think with all of the attacks that this government has made over the last few years, we've just seen an all-out assault against Māori, obviously, against Te Tiriti, against migrants, against women with the pay equity, with the war on nature, with the ongoing genocide in Palestine and the inability to even recognize Palestine as a state, which is the absolute bare minimum, let alone sanction Israel for its war crimes and its genocide. The opening of an FBI office, training right now with the IDF, with RIMPAC, this blatant cozying up to Israel and the USA, who seem to be acting with complete impunity as they continue on with their capitalist war machine. And we've also seen, you know, the attack on workers. We've seen attack on our disabled whānau, on our trans whānau, and the ultimate punchdown right now, which is on the most vulnerable people, who are our rough sleepers and our unhoused whānau with the move on orders. And so what we're seeing within the current parliamentary Westminster system is a pendulum. And we need to remember that the pendulum is not going from the left to the right. The pendulum is going from the far right back to the right, to the far right, to the right. And so we're going to continue on with that. And the work that many whānau have put into, whether it's been Māori land rights, whether it's been, you know, the kohanga reo movement, kapahaka, kura kaupapa, all of those things people have fought so hard for decades and decades. And what we have seen is this government have the ability to strip so much of that back to the bare minimum in just 3 years. So we know that ultimately we are not going to, you know, electoral politics is not like the theory of change for our liberation. Like, it's completely incompatible, right? So we need to be moving into what is revolutionary theory, and what does this journey look like for us if we are going to see the realization of our liberation, of our expression of tino rangatiratanga as our tupuna secured for us within Te Tiriti. And so I guess one of the concerns, or one of the things that I think is great about this kōrero that we're having now, is that we are shining a light on this while so much energy is being funneled directly back into the parliamentary system around voting. And it's absolutely essential that we do use our vote. I'm actively campaigning for Max Harris, for example, who is a candidate in the Tāmaki electorate, who, you know, has done incredible work around Te Tiriti. There's other candidates that I'm really supportive of and have a lot of respect for those that choose to go in there and fight for us within that system. But also we need to be putting the same amount of energy into the mahi that we're doing within our communities and making real material change and solutions for people that are, you know, actively seeing how people giving examples to our communities of how we can make change ourselves. And so some examples of that are the community kai on K Road. That's not funded in any kind of a way. That's people each week giving koha, volunteers coming together and meeting those unmet needs and the continuation of state violence against the most vulnerable people on our streets by providing warm nutritional meals. It's about us turning up and keeping ourselves safe from state violence in a protest space. It's about, if you've got a mara at your marae or in your community, you are living in action your food sovereignty by determining the health of your soil, what you grow, how you grow it, and how you distribute it to your whānau. If you have an occupation on the moana, on the whenua, noho whenua, you're defending your land or your ocean from privatization and development, and protecting your wāhi tapu, then you are really opening up a front and will experience what happens when we assert our rangatiratanga like that after all legal opportunities have been exhausted. And that's when you start to see the threat that becomes to capital, becomes to capital and becomes to the state. And so that's when that violent force comes out to make sure that they push that down. And so we've seen that at Protect Pūtiki, we saw that at Protect Roto Kākahi, we saw that at Ihumātao. So, but at the same time, those opportunities create hope for our people because we're drawing on that courage and we know what is the right thing to do. And when all legal options are exhausted, then we have to go out there and physically be on the whenua. So I'll maybe just close off on a couple of things just around hope. One thing that I found really helpful, I've got my screen on blur, so I'm not sure if you can see it, but this book here is really amazing. And I saw this wahine speak at the People's Conference for Palestine in Detroit, and her name is Lara Shihai, and she's from Lebanon. And the book is called From the Clinic to the Streets, and it's Psychoanalysis for Revolutionary Futures. And when I saw her speak at that conference, it really shifted something in me because she's explaining about psychic intrusions or colonial intrusions that are used to control us through our mind. And so for some people that might be around state surveillance, for some people it might be the weight and enormity of the violence of the economy and how so many people are struggling to make ends meet at the moment, and maybe in lots of different kinds of ways, but it also teaches us how to identify them and how to have psychic militancy so that we can keep that utter clear and not allow that to cloud our thinking or weigh down on us or divert us from the journey that we're on at the moment. And that is going to be so critically important, particularly for our young people, as the biodiversity and climate crises intensify, as capitalism is on its kind of, it's the sun is setting on capitalism, and they double down with all forms of violence and settler colonial violence and imperialism. And so Lara, we brought out to Aotearoa, and she's actually coming back next month, and we're hoping to do like a public talk with her in Tāmaki, but some really amazing learnings from that. And essentially it's just what Uncle Bob says, emancipate your mind from mental slavery. But it is just about those kind of psychological tools and warfare that they use against us and how to recognize those and clear the way so that we can stay focused on bringing into being te tiriti justice, which will mean that everybody on this whenua has access to warm, stable, dry housing, to kai, to clean energy, to thriving ecosystems and biodiversity, and secure the future that we need moving forward. But to bring that about, it's going to take a collective of us understanding that our movements and our struggles are intersectional. And at the heart of that is te tiriti justice. So yeah, Kaiawhena's kind of been doing some of that stuff, like, just supporting our migrants, Toitu Te Aroha, our trans Takatapu rainbow communities, the Hikoi, Palestine movement, workers' unions. We've all been finding ourselves out on the streets. And when we actually bring the power of all of those communities and of workers together combined with the Māori protest movement, it will be at some time very, very clear where the power resides in this country, and that our aroha and our hope and our kotahitanga is what's going to bring into reality the future that we all deserve, that was secured for us and that we are dependent on for a livable future.
Tēnā koe, rawe nā kōrero, kia ora whānau. If there were fire emojis, I reckon they'd be coming up all over the screen for that. That was rad. Awesome whānau. So we can hear then, it's urgent. It's not just hope, it's action. And like Kotuku and her hapu over there, Ngāti One, we can do it. Even if it feels beyond the imagination, it's not, it's with us. And so actually riffing on what B's just laid down there, when we talk about Matike Mai, we set out those 7 values like these seedlings, right? They're like seedlings, and we have to nurture and nourish the soil around them and allow these values to start to grow. And so often we sort of look at these values, we go, yep, okay, cool, that's cool. Love the sound of it. But what next? You know, people love the vision, but what next? And we've heard a little bit of that in that kōrero, but I want to ask that again specifically. And noting, there's one of these questions I can see. Thank you, tēnā koe, Jet, for your questions in the, and we'll come to questions as well after these pātai. But noting it's also an election year, and knowing, yeah, that's a small game. We got to beat them at their own game, but we're talking about actions for what's next for our mahi. And that, yes, we're decolonizing and pushing against a system, fighting against a system, but we're also doing this mahi of restoring and nurturing and growing the alternative, you know, living the alternative. So there's 2 sides to the movement. We still got to vote, okay? Just going to keep pushing that tonight. All right, I'm going to go back to you, Mikey. Hea hao whakaaro, what's your whakaaro on what's next? What's some actions we can be taking? Kia ora.
Yeah, and like as an anarchist myself, the question about voting always makes me real uncomfortable because I don't like I vote because the system that we're in at the moment we kind of need to. People are literally in the healthcare system. People are dying because of who's in there now, and we've got fires to put out, and part of that is about voting. But voting, of course, will never provide constitutional change for us. It will never mean, you know, it will never result into treaty being upheld, and it would never result in Matike Mai being manifested. But what I love about Matike Mai and the work that Moana Jackson did was they identified the problem, they identified the blueprint forward, and they identified a structure or goal at the end. And for me, it's about trying to center those values in all the mahi that we do in our communities, in our activism, in our campaigning, and use that to build the parallel structures amongst as roots, just like the picture you had. These are the roots, the values are the roots, and the plants will grow through the rot of the system that's around us as it decays and fails, and it will fail. And if we have the roots growing, that we can just build the parallel systems. But that means community building. It means engaging with long-term campaigns. And from my activism background, one of the biggest things I always find really important is being able to identify where each of the pressure points are on the system, where we can take those values of Matike Mai and apply additional pressure to the capitalist system, to the banks who are trying to maximize profits through property development, and put the pressure on the oil industry. Sorry, the skate park's coughing up over there. I don't know if it's coming through, but so sorry if you can hear that. It's
That's fun. Cool. Kia ora whānau, who can I pass?
Can we do next? Oops. Was that me? No. Go. Cool. Yeah, so I think, as I just really want to tautoko, Mikey and Bianca's kōrero just before too, and just extending on that, as living in a settler colonial society, the settler colonial society that we have in New Zealand, there's multiple different challenges and competing priorities in terms of challenges too. But one of the major challenges that we have, and this is what we talk about, in our Tiriti mahi too, as Tiriti educators, as decult educators, is the challenge at the moment now is that we've had a long time of being told what rangatiratanga is. Or we've had a long time of being told of what tino rangatiratanga looks like in terms of that usurping, as talked about, that encroachment, in your presentation, Matariki, the encroachment of settler law over ourselves and the myths that have come about as a result. And so I think one of the, challenges and one of the missions that is required of us now moving into a Matike Mai-led context or future is to retrain our brain into recognizing what is a colonial lie and what actually is our truth, what actually is rangatiratanga, what, mana, because, returning to a lot of the kōrero that Papa Moana used to talk about too, in the restoration of faith within ourselves, is in the restoration of, looking at, who were the representatives that signed Te Tiriti, or that was hapu, so then returning to, well then, hapu is the decision-making structures, our philosophical, political structures that came with that, and actually really diving into, or examining a lot of the way we operated tikanga, our decision-making structures across, and because as, Matariki whānau, as Matariki has, shown in her presentation, is that because of settler colonialism, there's been lots of myths around Te Tiriti, like it's Te Tiriti or the treaty's fault that we've ended up in this situation. And actually, when we really look at the evidence, when we really look at the core, the seeds of the issue, is that Te Tiriti was actually a really beautiful thing, whānau. It was this generous, very, very generous on behalf of our tipuna, offering a people who really needed a home, people who were coming from poverty themselves. My tipuna was Irish, came on a stowaway boat, desperate to escape Ireland and the famine that was happening there. And, our tipuna recognizing these people who really needed a home, but also really needed to be looked after and to be sorted out, And because there were hundreds and hundreds of hapu who had all different law, LAW, all different tikanga, it made sense to them that, all right, we'll offer you a governor to look after yourselves under your own law. But I think one of the challenges that we have today is really, is the reframing actually into recognizing what is a colonial lie and what isn't, and then a return to ourselves, or reorienting of ourselves within that way. And what that looks like, is as Bianca, I think Bianca answered it really, before, is in terms of that looks like is really, diving into the values, or returning to our hapu if we haven't already. Because I know that as a part of settler colonialism, disconnection is a huge, huge thing for us as a people, and disconnection from marae, disconnection from the whenua, disconnection from the taiao. How can we be talking, we're talking about Matike Mai or whenua if many hapu don't have whenua to begin with, because it's all been taken, so there's lots of those kōrero too. But I think and I know that hapu or marae can sometimes be there can be tension in that conversation because of the different dynamics that happen. But as we know, when we really look into it, whānau, when we really look at the whakapapa behind the issues and the challenges that marae or hapu might have, those are results of colonialism, and that's not the fault of our communities. That's not the fault of those leaders who are behind the doors, slaving away, or up till midnight, catering for the community. Like all of those different, there's lots and lots of different dynamics. And I think being critical, and critical as in understanding how power is operating, being critical, when it comes to engaging with our communities, when it comes to engaging with, land occupations or, taiao movements and stuff, is really, really important to, recognize, because this is what Papa Graham Hingangaro Smith talks about, is that in order to understand where we want to go, we have to understand accurately what has gone wrong. and being critical actually of, some of the things, so that we don't, when we get into, fully, deeply having these kōrero around Matike Mai, having these wānanga, enacting it, that we aren't reproducing harm, that we aren't, maybe recolonizing ourselves, and I know this is why I'm like loving the book. Can't wait to get that book too, because those are some of the tensions that a lot of theorists have talked about, like whenua, from the clinic to the streets. That whenua, like lots of them have talked about in terms of making sure that when we do, get into our liberation movements, that we aren't reproducing harm, that we aren't recolonizing ourselves, that we are returning to our tikanga, our laws. And yes, I hope I answered that question. Going to pass on.
Just riffing on that amazing kōrero, I think important next steps or actions include, just what Te Kotuku just said, really understanding and diagnosing the problem and the current terrain that we're in, the political and material conditions that we're facing, and the barriers that they, present us with, because they've changed, from 2016 of Matike Mai, they've changed even from last year, and they're going to keep on changing. So I think really essential work, and I know this is probably like a boring researcher theory answer, but I think really essential work is mapping the terrain and how it changes, and the domestic barriers, the regional barriers, and the international barriers that are at play. Because we know, just in terms of regional and international barriers, we know that the Atlas Network is a major force that's targeting Indigenous sovereignty movements around the world, and here in Aotearoa, as they did in the lead up to the 2023 election. And they're, of course, doing it again and doing it with more power. And related to that, we're seeing the increasing power of transnational corporations and the blurring of the lines between our government, the state, and corporations, but also the US and Israel, with their Zionist fascist projects that are influencing our laws. So really attending to these different barriers, identifying them and naming them, studying them, I think is really important. And doing so with the values of Matike Mai, I think is really crucial. And I think with that, Catherine Conlon made a really important intervention. I wish I had her book like Dee had, but she made a really important intervention about the need for our decolonization efforts to think beyond the colonial state and to think about the role of finance, capital, and capitalist entities, as Mikey also said as well. And I think that's a really crucial step. And I know that so many researchers and advocates are doing great work in this vein. Emi Rakete, who couldn't be here, Matt Scobie and Jane Kelsey, and so many others. So I think really thinking with them and foregrounding anti-capitalist theory, revolutionary theory, is really important in praxis, of course, because we can't just target the state in elections. That's only a small fraction of the problem. So we really have to map the terrain and have our eyes focused on the wider horizon. I'll pass it on to Bea.
Kia ora. Thanks, Dylan. I love that Whanon's name has already entered the chat, which is great. And Lara actually talks a lot about Whanon in this book as well. And Amilcar Cabral as well features quite a lot in that, from the clinic to the streets. So yeah, I was just thinking a little bit more about the hope thing. And that, I can't remember who said it. It might have been Mikey, just around, that's kind of what they want us to feel. They want us to feel despair, and they want us to feel hopelessness, and just want to also remind us that we will go through all kinds of different feelings along the way. But that despair has nothing useful to lend to the struggle that we are in, and that it does take our collective efforts and our collective care to move through that and into a place of commitment to the journey that we're on. And also, I think it's important to remember that everything is actually a defeat until victory. And so not to get kind of caught down in, oh, well, we had this massive hike where 100,000 people down to Parliament. We stopped it at the first reading, but there's every single chance that this current government could get re-elected for another 3 years. And I think people need to be prepared for that, and not to find despair in that, but also to recognize, which is hard, I know that's a big ask, but also to see that as the opportunity that it will present us with. And so when we go into moments of crisis, which is what many people are already in and are currently experiencing. People are struggling to pay their power bills in the middle of winter. People are struggling to, fill up their cars with fuel because of the continuing illegal acts of aggression and war against Iran by the US, and the ongoing genocide in Palestine. And there's just so many pressures on people. So if we have a continuation of this, that is going to intensify. But what a crisis does present us with is it presents us with a really unique opportunity to organize, and to mobilize and to bring and to really focus on what it is that we're bringing into being and how we're going to get there. And I think in those moments, it's when we can start to see with more clarity on our own political horizon exactly what that looks like. So for me, Matike Mai is so incredibly beautiful, powerful, the mahi that's been done, the huge amount of education that's been done by yourself, Matariki, by Veronica Tawhai, by Margaret Mutu, Moana Jackson, so many people, Arama, Rata, Max Harris. I know there's lots of people that just list goes on. And that is so incredibly important. But now we've got to take that education and we've got to move forward into what is this looking like around our approach of theory? What is it looking like for organizing on the ground? And how much power are we building on the ground? We know that from the slide that you brought up, it was really clear to see, that was really powerful to see, like the beehive and the King Charles and the Governor General and just kind of the whole structure of it. And we know that to protect that, the state has violence. So they have the police, they have the military, they have violence to be able to make sure that those laws that they're creating now or that they'll create in the future are enforced through state violence and the use of the police. And so that can often leave us feeling like, well, what does that leave us with? And I think that what we need to remember is that the power that is actually, or the thing that is of most concern to a capitalist system, is actually capital. And when you look at the people who are generating the wealth of this country that is then being held by a minority, by the elite, by what is it, 310 families in this country own something like 90% of the wealth. It's actually all of us that create that. It's wage labor that creates that. And so we have that power. We actually have the power of the people. We have the power of the economy. We have the power of aroha, of mobilizing, of organizing, and making these connections together and realizing that we have more in common with each other than we ever will with the billionaire or the elite class. And that's all of us, from our rough sleepers, from those that are really, man, I can't tell you how absolutely heartbreaking it is, these move on orders, how cruel they are, and with what people are dealing with, and the suffering that is happening out on the streets, for those to be coming into law for as people as young as 14 years old. But it's like right across to, even like, if we're going to talk about classes, like middle class New Zealand, they're starting to feel exactly what particularly Māori have been feeling for, over a century. This kind of like starting to feel the pinch of the impacts of the kind of capitalist system. So I think we need to be really clear on settler colonialism, settler colonial violence, colonialism, Western imperialism, and how that's impacting us and really compromising our regional security and peace, and completely shifted us away from an independent and progressive foreign policy. And then we need to really understand why te tiriti, why mana motuhake, tino rangatiratanga is such a threat. And it's because it is the roadblock to those things. It is the roadblock. And it actually means sharing and making our decisions based on the well-being of everybody and the well-being of our taiao, of our fisheries, of our ecosystems. And so that's why they want to get rid of it. But more and more people, what I love about the environmental movement, because even these people that, they might not even know that much about te tiriti yet, but they're like, I can't believe that, these laws can go through and we make all these wins for the environment. They can just strip it all back like this. I'm like, that's why we need constitutional transformation for Papatuanuku, So it's like people are starting to make those connections. Conservation Amendment Bill, prioritizing economic development before conservation, it's completely incompatible and impossible from a Te Ao Māori worldview. It's not even possible to do that. So we're starting to make those connections within our communities, and this is something that Matariki you've described so beautifully, and it's so critically important, is that we're already on this journey. It's not whether or not it's going to come into being. We're already on our way. And regardless of what they're doing in Paremata and those laws and legislations, yes, there will be suffering. Yes, people are dying because of it. Yes, people are ending up in prison. But they will never be able to define our liberation, the realization or the expression of our tino rangatiratanga and te tiriti justice. That's with the people. And the people of Aotearoa want a thriving environment. They want to have healthy, flourishing lives for them and their children. They want to have affordable kai and warm, dry homes. They want to have what they were actually, that's what was extended to them through te tiriti, through that manaakitanga. It was based on manaaki. So, I think I'll leave it there, but I think it's just, a realization of, we're not trying to replicate a capitalist system here within brown capitalism. We're moving forward and moving to a system that is fair for everyone and wouldn't, that essentially, if it's in a deep democracy, would never allow for the capture of extreme wealth for a few at the expense and suffering of the many.
Mic drop. Kia ora, mean. Kia ora whānau. That was an epic kōrero there. All right. Now, as much as I want our kōrero to just keep going, we do have about just over half an hour left. And so I'm starting to turn to these amazing questions. Thank you, whānau, for all the engagement that's coming through our Q&A. And thank you to Hannah, who's helping me sort them as well. So, whānau, one of the questions that often comes up within Matike Mai anyway is, and within Tiriti justice, is this idea of, okay, well, yeah, how is that relevant to all of us, though? That sounds like a real Māori thing, or maybe just a Māori Pākehā thing. How is that relevant to all of us? And I think Bee's just touched on that with talking about Papatuanuku. This isn't just about people, individuals. This is about how we relate to each other and how we relate to the land. And so just trying to tie it into some of these questions that have come up as well, like there's a question here about, how can people, tauiwi and Pākehā be involved, and take action. And, oh gosh, how do I tie these questions? Maybe, okay, so it's a question of relevance to everyone. How is it relevant? How can people be involved from their different parts of society, from their different cultures? We have all sorts of people living here in Aotearoa. And one of the questions I'm going to tie it to is one by Phoebe, tēnā koe Phoebe, and her partai is around this value of conciliation. This value of conciliation, how do we enliven that? How do we embed conciliation now into our work for change? And I really like that, because one of the things that happens when our movement, especially when we're moving, working across difference with different people from different backgrounds, conflict is always going to arise, because that's what it's like to be together. That's what it means to live together. But conciliation is asking us to be good to each other even through conflict. And so, can we expect conciliation at a national level if we can't practice that interpersonally? You know, maybe we need to be able to practice that at a small scale before we can even expect it at a large scale. So, letting go of cancel culture, for example, and calling in people. You know, if we have a disagreement, how do we make sure we have these ways that our tikanga can guide us and actually just being good to each other? So that's a long-winded question, whānau. Take it wherever you want to take it. And yeah, just loving the kōrero so far. So I'm not going to pick on Mikey this time. It can go to whoever feels like jumping in.
Yeah, it's a really great question, and particularly, you know, like across our mahi or our organizing spaces or whatever it is, we might not always agree with each other, and that's okay. And I just kind of like maybe, yeah, I just kind of feel like there's nothing like a common enemy to create unity, and like a common vision to create unity as well. And given like just in terms of this current government, I think like the stakes have literally never been higher than right in this very moment we're in right now. For multiple reasons. Ongoing wars and genocide, you know, the attack against Te Tiriti, the stripping back of protections for Te Taiao. I mean, the list just goes on and on. And I think that's what we need to keep our focus on, and then also find ways to be able to work through our differences in a way that respects people's dignity, respects people's mana, and have those conversations in a way that are kind of solutions focused so that we can get back on with the mahi that is so urgently needed. And so that we can keep on with that momentum moving forward, and also recognize that all of us are playing our own part as well in such a huge project. And also, you know, like we've been talking a lot about Parliament and the state and so on, and they also have a role, you know, at some stage to play in this as well. And so, yeah, it's a kind of I'm not sure if I'm exactly kind of answering the question, but when the enemy is so clear and it's never been more in focus, I just really encourage people not to choose lateral violence or to choose minor squabbles amongst each other, or get absorbed with distractions, which is another tactic used by the government and the far right, to kind of recognize that those things are feed into their agenda, and it serves us. All it does is it slows us down, and hinders our movement forward. And so, before thinking about like just, you know, I'm so mad at that person, I'm gonna make a reel and post this, or like I don't know what people are doing, but you know, whatever it is, like kind of maybe think, okay, who is actually creating this harm? Who is the common enemy here? What is it that we are up against? And given that the stakes are so incredibly high, is this helpful? Or would my energy be better directed toward that and the solutions of moving us beyond that, so we can bring into the realization the future that we urgently need to be able to, as Dylan says, survive. So I think maybe just sometimes zooming out taking a breath and being like, okay, like in the bigger picture of things, this is probably something that I need to deal with, but how am I going to do that in a way that is going to allow us to progress forward? Instead of, we don't need any more destruction or handbrakes or anything on the movement. We got work to do and we need to get on with it and work together. Yeah. We don't all need to work together. Some people, if you don't want to work together, kei te pai, just don't drag each other down. Easy. You're all working to a common goal, just don't drag each other down. Do your own thing. You don't even have to be friends. Who cares? But we don't need to go after each other. This is when we've got enemies like these.
Kia ora, nā we. Hongi hongi te whaiwhaia, hongi hongi te manehurani. Like, know the scent of your enemy, but know the scent of your destiny as well. Kia ora. Anybody else got, because we've got heaps of pārtai, but if anyone's got any whakaaro on that one.
Oh,
Yeah.
You go, Mikey.
all right. I'm just thinking about that partai from Phoebe as well. Just one of the things I really love about Kaiāwhina is that we're not a protest movement that identifies an injustice and then we go and fight in an adversarial way. We're about creating community care in a radical way. And I think that's a big part of that, the answer to the question around how do we do this manifesting of the values of Matike Mai when so often as activists we're reactive, we're angry, our actions are targeting against something, whereas we have so many examples of activist movements that are building alternatives, and Matike Mai is that. So yeah, just it's really wonderful watching Kaiāwhina grow not only from this community care stuff at protests, but now expanding into the community kai and the ways that we can kind of be activists in other ways and help build an example of that conciliation, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Really tautoko that kōrero, Mikey, and just really wanted to extend on also Bianca's kōrero as well. And it's a work in progress, but it's what Bianca was talking about in terms of mana and the dignity of other people, and particularly in a settler colonial society where the inhuman way in which people were treated is sometimes just becomes normal, and we see that and I really appreciate the kōrero tonight around Palestine, but we see that with the treatment of our Palestinian whanaungas, with our Iranian whanaungas, and I think too, it's one of our approaches within Te Atukura educators is, when we're having a difficult conversation, challenging conversation with someone who might have views different to our own, we really have to challenge, we really have to channel into ourselves. And whakapapa is often one approach that I like to look at things in terms of, I could just bite this person's head off, or just go to town with them. But at the end of the day, what is that going to solve in terms of thinking about my own mokopuna, thinking about my own tamariki, who are going to inevitably have to share the same space with that person's mokopuna? So it's about, and I know sometimes whānau, those things can sound really airy-fairy, but I think because we live in such a violent times and have been for the last 100 and something years, we've become hardened to think that those things are airy-fairy, to think that those things that come from our tipuna, that those ways in which the sophistication in which our tipuna, fought and believed, and all of their beliefs have just become airy-fairy, But actually, those things were very real for us, and they are very real for us in terms of Wairoa, how Wairoa is operating in the moment, how Māori is operating in the moment. And this is something that I've really come to learn, especially in just the last year, is actually how you choose to engage with that person really, really impacts in terms of whakapapa. in terms of, because you might not see that person ever again, but you may have made just that tiny little bit of impact, is significant, is really, really significant. So that's one approach that we really choose to channel in on is just thinking about that longer whakapapa, the longer end game, and of that our mokopuna have to share space with this person's mokopuna. So that's why it's really important that we, stay as in that Māori tau as much as possible. And then of course, we go into the back room and have a big rant about it to ourselves, and that's completely healthy and normal, but it's just choosing how to deal with that. Yes, important.
Awesome. Kia ora. Dylan, did you have any whakaaro on that one? Kei te pai.
Just quickly, because I'm so inspired by all the insights that's being shared, and I think that question about conciliation is really key, and thinking about whakapapa as well, because Matike Mai is, of course, extremely relevant and important for all tauiwi, and it's not just a matter of survival or mutual survival, but relationality, and those genealogies and whakapapa links that are enduring and will always endure, I think are really important to acknowledge, and kind of thinking about building, I guess, a movement among or strengthening the existing movements that we have with tauiwi around Matike Mai. I think part of the conciliation is really getting at the truth, the uncomfortable truth, and being really unflinchingly honest about why tauiwi aren't supporting Matike Mai, aren't supporting Te Tiriti. I think that's a really important part of the conciliation. And, we know what's driving these divisions, colonial immigration systems and colonial borders, and those things have really shaped the relationships for many generations and reinforced barriers and broken up relationships. So I think really confronting these divisions in a way that's, consistent with the Matike Mai principles is really key. And I know, just to kind of shout out some thinkers who are doing great work on this, because I know that the chat is asking, for some, reading or things to do, but Ara Marata and Tahu Kukatai have done incredible work on this, Faisal Al-Assad, Carlo Mila, but also incredible groups like ASTA, Asian Supporting Tino Rangatiratanga, have really, I think, given us really important models that we can continue developing and growing. And I think, just kind of speaking particularly from a Pacific tauiwi perspective, it's important for us not to just provide the political education, but to also challenge and disrupt some of the movements that we're seeing that are anti-Māori and anti-Matike Mai, because they are there, and they're a big barrier, I think, to our collective flourishing. And I'm sure many of us have seen, some Pacific movements that are aligning with New Zealand First, and really proliferating anti-Māori and anti-Te Tiriti rhetoric within our communities. So I think it's a really crucial step for us Pacific Tauiwi to challenge in a way which is relational and in line with Matike Mai. And I think, just to kind of think more broadly, I think the regional dimension is key, because one of the ways in which the New Zealand state and the Crown is able to maintain its illegitimacy and continue the current constitutional arrangements is through its influence within the wider Pacific region, which is made possible through regional organizations like the Pacific Islands Forum, and of course, so-called Australia is a key part of that. So I think we really need to think of ways that we can continue strengthening sovereign ties, solidarities beyond the state, beyond the forum, and even beyond, Pacific state governments. I can go into a lot of, a different tangent thinking about, what formal decolonization through the UN has done to Pacific states in terms of dependency, and we're seeing the alignment with Israel. So we need to imagine and nurture futures beyond these structures. And there's been incredible work that's already been done with this. Many of you would know about Te Hui Oranga in 2024, which was the revival of the nuclear-free and independence movement that we saw in the 80s. And there's the Whangaroa Declaration, which I really urge you all to kind of Google and to research, because it's very much inspired and in line with Matike Mai. And we also have Matike Hawaii, which is challenging AUKUS. So many of these incredible initiatives that we need to look to and nurture and focus on for, the conciliation that we need to see.
Kia ora. That's fabulous. So the answer is join in, whānau. The movement's all around you. Join in, find something, join in, because there's a lot of people being active. This conversation's an old conversation. It's about power, about tino rangatiratanga that benefits all of us. It's uplifting te ao Māori, which within it has manaaki and created belonging for everyone. We can create belonging all the time in te ao Māori. That's what a pōheri is. That's what a whakatau is. It's the creation of belonging for others to join in. And there's movements and actions to join in. And I guess my 2 cents as well is just, this tangata tiriti as people choosing to identify as tangata tiriti, I think is really, really a special thing that we have in Aotearoa now. And we saw it in the hikoi, hard out, masses of people. What's the obligation? To be tangata tiriti, it's not just a badge that you put on. To be tangata tiriti, you're accepting the invitation in te tiriti to belong by honouring that world that was here, by joining into that world of te ao Māori that was here. And if you don't want to be tangata tiriti, then the only other way really is to claim belonging through conquest, through the doctrine of discovery, And so there's just wanting to add that in, because I think this conversation is a lot about this system that we have that's imposed itself upon us as a system that others us and separates us. And so this is about how do we come together. Like B said, we don't all have to be best friends, happy chappy, but we do have to understand dignity, mana, honor, and then understand these complex relationships that we also have internationally. And so that's cool. So whānau, got our last question, and this happens a lot with Matike Mai conversations. I think it's really, and this is part of being in this shape where a system is on top, right? Is it's hard to imagine beyond this system. And so a lot of the partai that I can see in our chats, and this is really natural, is to ask, well, sure, what policy can exist in here? Or is there some, within democracy, is there something that we could be voting for or doing that can happen here that can allow constitutional transformation? Or do we believe in co-governance? Or what about, there's Te Aka Whaiora, there's Te Urewera Act, legal personhood, Whanganui River, legal personhood, there's these things coming up. Yeah, what about those things? And is there democracy in this future constitutional vision that we're seeing with Matike Mai? So I'm going to leave those questions to the panel. Yeah.
It's kind of like, co-governance was a compromise and they don't even want that, so it's like, we're on I guess just like with constitutional transformation, I think we're on a journey to a national conversation of some kind, and that's how we need to think of it. So everyone can be actively doing something in your everyday life, probably, whether it's having conversations with your whānau, with your, with your community, at your workplace, if you work at a school. It's working toward making sure that we're being really honest about our history and where we've come from, so that we can have integrity and honesty and where we're moving to as a nation as well. And so we have a whole nation essentially to bring along with us on this journey and on this conversation. I get conversation and conservation mixed up a lot at this point in time, but along with us on that conversation. And yeah, I just think that's what I certainly feel really committed to, and that's one kind of pathway of the journey, and there will be probably a point where the balance of kind of power is tested at some stage. And I think it's really important for us just to make sure that we remained really disciplined and really principled, and make sure that we keep in mind, like as kaiawhina, we are our values in action. It's why we have them and why we speak them. And when we're on the ground, we we are those in action. And I think it's the same for Matike Mai. We have those values, we have those uara that help to guide us on this, and that wisdom and that has come from Moana Jackson and many others, to make sure that this is a movement that is safe and that is bringing people along with us and is genuinely talking about pathways forward, that are based in integrity and dignity and mana and all of those things that we hold dear. And yeah, so I think it's that, having those conversations, but you're also being a part of the journey. Like if you are only able to turn up to an action once or twice a year, those are really incredible as well. We saw it with the Hikoi Mō Te Tiriti, with all of those people up and down the motu, and what an incredible dress rehearsal for the future. Wow, 100,000 people. I mean, that's only going to keep on growing because we're not going anywhere. Look at what we've been through over the last 200 years and look at where we are now. And we're only getting stronger and stronger. And you see, I was lucky. I was actually down at Parliament when it was the first reading of the Treaty Principles Bill, and Hannah got up and did her haka. It kind of turned her into a global superstar. Everyone saw her. And I was thinking in my mind, I know thousands of young wahine Māori that know how to do that exactly. I was thinking, man, it's way too late for these guys if they're worried about, hana. So it's just like how beautiful and strong and how amazing we are as a people. And that once people realize how much value and what they have to gain by learning about our tikanga, our te ao Māori, how much it actually adds value to people's lives, and it actually addresses issues like equity. We're not talking about equality, we're talking about equity. So yeah, that's a capitalist worst nightmare, particularly if you want to capture wealth and not share it with a whole bunch of people. And I think that the more that gets talked about, and the value that Te Tiriti promises and has secured for, for manuhiri to these that call these lands home as well, the more that it's going to gain momentum. And a lot of that comes down to making sure that history is taught with honesty in our schools. That education, like what you've shared tonight, Matariki, is something that is normal for young people to learn about. And it's really incredible to think about how much hope and inspiration that would give to the younger generations if they were actually able to see that another system is completely possible and will be brought into being. And this here is unique here to Aotearoa, and this is what it looks like here. So yeah, just think of yourselves as you're all campaigners. That's all my job is. We're all campaigners moving on this journey together, fighting for our liberation from this settler colonial system that is continuing to dominate and hold down the beauty that awaits for our mokopuna.
I feel like Te Kotuku's ready to say something.
Beautiful kōrero tonight, whānau. I just have to say, this has been such an awesome panel to be a part of. I think answering the question around, well, the kōrero around structures, especially going into the Q&A thing too. If we're doing book recommendations, I do have to just say one of my favorite authors is a man called Glenn Coulthard. He's from the Dene Nations in Canada, and he's written heaps of stuff. But his book Red Skin White Mask, after Fanon's Black Skin White Mask, but Red Skin White Mask, looking at the experiences of Native nations in Canada through the lens similar to Fanon analyses. And one of the things he looks at is what is called a theory is a recognition politics. Where you're in a settler colonial society and, all these violent atrocities happen to Indigenous peoples. And then they go to the next phase, which is, if they couldn't have gotten rid of us, then there's assimilation policies. And then within those things, then, reconciliation processes do. And one of the reconciliation processes is he looks at this recognition politics. So, for example, that's, we have a settlement, that they offer us the opportunities to a settlement process. Those processes are really, as we know, those experiences are really dehumanizing. Any claimants that go in and do a treaty settlement, you're there for years, if not decades. And often the claimants don't actually even get to see the result of their thing because they've become kaumātua and then passed away. And so there's lots of dehumanizing processes within that. But then, of course, they get the settlement and then they're forced to set up a PSGA, what is, known as a PSG, and that's under a white governance structure. So it's a way to offer, an illusion of tino rangatiratanga, or offer an illusion of liberation, but actually there's no power and there's just very little resources within that system. And I think that's one thing we really need to be mindful of when we're looking at Matike Mai, is instead of jumping to the structure of what is it going to look like or who's going to be the bosses, or because those, as Matariki has talked about very, very eloquently tonight, those things are what we are forced to see above us at the moment. But actually there's our tikanga, or the tikanga that stems from the whenua, that is Aotearoa, is actually far more deeper than any of those approaches and those ideas. And so recognition politics is something that Glenn talks about as in being careful of how the settler state looks to re-entrench itself and re-entrench its power. And I know, whānau, sometimes those theory terms can sound very distant, but actually it's just helpful to understand where our context is so that we don't really reproduce the same context going into the future and going into that Matike Mai context. And I think it's quite interesting to me actually that we haven't really talked about the structures a lot tonight, and I just have to think that it has a lot to do with the presentation and the foundation that you've set before us, Matariki, and seeing that, because it really is, as all of us have talked about, it really is about the values, whānau. It's not about the structures, or we focus on the values, because the settler colonialism as we know it is about structure. It is about those systems of power, those hierarchy of power. We focus on the values. Those really are where, where we can find sources of hope, where we can find sources of faith, is within those values, because that's where we find ourselves as well. And I think going to the question around tauiwi and where tauiwi sit within Tiriti, within Matike Mai, is we can see that within Te Tiriti, Tiriti being this very welcoming, generous offer, is the same for tauiwi, is the same for, our migrant communities, all of our communities that come to Aotearoa. It is just such a sad thing that all of our, all of our people have been denied opportunity to learn about Te Tiriti, to learn about the tikanga of the whenua, to learn about hapu, to learn about the way we operate, because there's so much deep knowledge within those things. But if I think there's any one message, aside from all the cool key book recommendations, and it's to really look at that. I know it's another word too, whānau, but looking at the decol of our minds that is required. And it's not to say that we can't get Matike Mai until we get to the decol, but it is, it is an important journey in terms of looking at Matike Mai. Because if we had Matike Mai tomorrow, if we woke up and we had the restoration of tino rangatiratanga, unfortunately the thinking would still be the same, and the thinking being that individual, privatized, self-serving behavior that as a result of things like imperialism, as a result of capitalism, as a result of the encroachment of neoliberalism and neoliberal policies upon, our state as we know it, our context as we know it. So that's a really, really important journey when it comes to Matike Mai. It's not the end goal. It's not that we can't have Matike Mai without getting to that point, but it is just an important, journey into it. Yeah, I'm going to hand over now. Goodbye.
Kia ora. I love the expressions of rangatiratanga that we are seeing as well. Like, I just wanted to kind of mention for some of our communities when they can be involved in that. And we do, obviously have a capitalist system that we are living in. And so we do have PSGs and, we are involved with, fisheries management that I'm not sure if you've just heard. One of our most common fish that we have in our meals and our fish and chips and whatnot is now collapsed. The Tarakihi fishery has completely, collapsed in Aotearoa. It's down to 7% of its population. The whole tipa scallops, has collapsed in Aotearoa. There's no scallop beds anywhere around the country that are open. So yeah, we're looking at this kind of just extraction mentality around, particularly, I was just thought it was funny when you said and the seas. I'm like, oh, that's like one of the biggest issues. But when we actually come back to to your marae, to your hapu, to the decisions that are being made, within your wharenui, through the discussions that are happening with your whānau or your hapu, and then extending those out to your wider community, to the point where then you're getting hundreds of people come and gather down on your beach to set in place a rāhui, because you don't need, decades of reports showing the decline of this species and that species. You just listen to your old people and you know that there's not quota out there in knee-deep water. You know that there's no tipa washing ashore like they used to be able to go down there on a high tide and get buckets full, and they haven't been showing up for 10 years now. We know that there needs to be something put in place to protect these. And it's such an incredible expression of rangatiratanga a rāhui. You're not going to the government and saying, can we have I want to apply under the section 186A of the Fisheries Act for a 2-year temporary closure because you won't recognise rāhui. The rāhui gets set down, you bring your whole community along with you. Everyone knows what it's for. They've participated in the process of it. And that those kind of things that are happening locally give people such a beautiful and powerful insight into what we're talking about. So you can break it down to these kind of microcosms in different areas in rohe where, like, we never ceded our sovereignty. We just need to start asserting our rangatiratanga, like that. And that's what part of Matike Mai is about too. But you can do that in a way where you bring your whole community along with you, and where those decisions are made with your whānau and your hapu in accordance with what's happening within your rohe. And we're seeing that with our whānau up in, in Whangaroa, around the tipa, around, different rāhui that are happening up in the far north and across the motu. And I just think that that kind of leadership and that community understanding is a huge part of this journey that we're on. And we don't need to have all the answers about, what is it going to structure this and all the things. Matike Mai, rise up, literally means to rise up. There's a calling for us to bring this into being, to be examples of it, to build trust and relationships and connections where we're working alongside people to provide material solutions, or work together for material solutions, for people with the hardships that people are experiencing, or getting involved in supporting your local marae or your hapu or whatever it is. And so, yeah, that I just wanted to kind of, and that's what the mahi that you were doing te Kotuku with, your noho whenua. It's another expression of that rangatiratanga for people to learn from, and probably for your wider community, I imagine, to be inspired by and be a part of. How beautiful, to be a part of something like that. So, yeah.
Choice, kia ora bei, kia ora whānau. I just want to see if there's any more whakaaro from our tāne, Dylan, Mikey, and also tagging in these last sort of questions of how to get involved. If you got any whakaaro on how to get involved with these movements too. But yeah, anything you want to say, and then I'll pass it back to Bianca to close us off for the evening and thank all our whānau for joining us. So yeah, kaya kōrero, Dylan, Mikey.
Yeah, just one of the things, being the token Pākehā on that panel tonight, and just listening to some of the discussion just then, one of the things I'm really struck with in my brain is just how I'm constantly trying to interpret everything that we talk about through these like Pākehā philosophies that I've spent years of activism kind of building up in here, and how I think that we come across concepts like Matike Mai, and we start to view them through the lenses that we've built up through the years, and a lot of that's coming from the colonial enculturation that we experience, and as a migrant to this country, when we arrive, we get enculturated into the Pākehā colonial worldview pretty quickly when we first get here, and the amount of work that we actually that has to happen to kind of like dismantle that, and then be able to actually kind of allow, yeah, you know what I mean? Like it's hard to really grasp it. But the reason I say that is that I've spent a lot of time just focusing my worldview and political analysis through a lens of anarchist philosophy, and a big part of anarchist theory of change has to do with the fact that we don't really set a specific structure goal. We just kind of work together as a community with our values of mutual aid and autonomy, and that at the forefront of what we do, and we allow ourselves to make mistakes as we go along in building the future and the world that we want. And I'm not saying that is the answer to that question around like how do we get there, but that's how my brain is put it on top of Matike Mai, which I think still has. I think it still relates to that. Like we're not dictating a structure.
Yeah.
Here we're identifying the values and what the world that we want to live in looks like, while allowing some flexibility in terms of what happens to get there, which I think is why, are we going to get Matike Mai from Parliament? No, but can we leverage parliamentary processes to build up a movement? Probably, but ensuring that we do that in a way that doesn't, as Dylan was saying, like bringing in that colonial mindset and that into what gets built. Yeah, if that makes sense. Sorry, it's so late. My brain is so tired, but there's some things from my brain.
That's great. That's great. Kia ora, Mikey. Kia ora, Dylan.
Kia ora, just super quick because I know we're over time, but just along those lines, and to kind of think about that question of democracy, and answer in an anarchist way, I think that, democracy is a facade. It's a distraction that we must divest from. It exists to, stop us imagining from something different. It's a liberal promise that's never been fulfilled anywhere. So we really need to divest from these liberal ideas and these myths, and invest in exactly what Te Kotuku and what Bianca have kind of spoken about, which are these acts of rangatiratanga. I think those are the structures that are going to, that we need to invest in. Not democracy or the state or elections, but, these everyday acts of rangatiratanga that we're seeing. So yeah, that's just all I want to say. And thank you so much, everyone, and yeah, for this incredible webinar.
Kia ora. Yeah, just all that democracy, it's so true within our tikanga. You don't have to be 18 to have an opinion.
Yeah.
We listen to our tamariki, mokopuna is part of our tikanga. What's tika is to understand, let the house speak, and that's including our tamariki. So, tautoko, that whakaro. Kia ora whānau. All right, pass it over to you, B. Tina.
Kia ora. Kia ora. Thank you so much, Matariki, for guiding us through your presentation and facilitating the kōrero amongst the panel this evening, and to Te Kotuku and Mikey and Dylan. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared. It was a real honour for us to do this tonight, and on behalf of Kaiawhina, and I'm sure the people who have tuned in this evening and come along as well, we're just so grateful. And a reminder that yes, you must use your vote this election, enroll whānau, get out and vote. But let's be really clear that we should not be funneling all of our energy into a system that is not compatible with a lot of the things that we've been talking about this evening, and find the hope and the inspiration in this journey that we are already on. We are already rising up. We are already organizing. We are understanding the systems of oppression. We are understanding what is waiting for us, and the urgency that this moment calls for. And the fact that, as we mentioned before, the stakes have never been higher. So we've got mahi to do, and reflect on the values of Matike Mai, be those in action, and thank you very much for joining us. So I'll just close us off with a karakia for the evening. The webinar has been recorded. I'm not sure where we'll put that yet, but we'll find somewhere. And then we do have email, kaiawhina Aotearoa@gmail.com, or an Instagram. If you were wanting to share it or anything, maybe just get in contact with us and we can let you know where it's gone up, because I got a question come through about that. So thank you again. And I'll just close us off now. Me karakia tātou. Unuhia mai te urutapu nui, kia wātea, kia māma, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairua, i te aratakatū, koe ara e rongo whakairia ake ki runga kia tina. Huie tai kie.
Ai ki.
Tēnā tātou.
Kia ora.
Ō mate.
Marie.
Yeah.
Maori.